Hi, my name's Lisa. This is Bundy. He's helping me with my video today. He wanted to sit on the comfy chair with me. So basically, I wanted to do a series of videos about autism from my point of view as a person with autism. And I wanted to do this for a couple of different reasons. So the first reason being that I don't think a lot of people know much about it or know how it manifests, especially in females and in adults as well. And I just wanted to provide a bit of information so that people can try and understand each other a bit better and just, tell my stories about how I deal with things on a daily basis. And I also wanted it to be a resource for people with autism or people who think that they might have autism. Because my big thing was that I thought that I was the only person that did these things or felt this way. And then I found a whole community of people who were just like me. And I love reading all their stories and watching videos about them because it relates to me, and I can see that there is other people out there like me. I wasn't the only person wandering around by myself. So yeah, that was sort of the driving motivation behind this. Because I didn't know that I had autism for so long, I felt quite alone. So I wanted to start with my story. So my therapist last year told me that she believes that I had autism, and at the age of 29. And so I went and researched pretty much everything that I could find about autism, and I joined a whole bunch of Facebook pages for people with autism, and I've pretty much related to about 95% of what people were saying. So that was how I sort of worked it out. I haven't been formally diagnosed yet, but it's something that I'll look into in the future, sort of working out the logistics of how that all works. But yeah, I just wanted to talk a bit about some things that affect people with autism and basically affect their ability to communicate or integrate with society. So one of my biggest ones is probably that I have an inner monologue running like 24 hours a day. It's basically like my subconscious is constantly feeding me information about my environment, and then I get little anxious little thoughts like whether I'm running late, and I'm checking the clock every 5 minutes because my brain's telling me that I'm going to be late. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm early, and I've just spent a whole car ride thinking that I was going to be late. I also sort of repeat phrases in my head over and over again for no apparent reason. Often I find I do this when I'm jogging or riding my bike. It's just like a rhythmic thing to say over and over again. But yeah, I get that. It could be something as simple as there's a cat on the corner and it just gets repeated over and over in my head. And then also sort of during conversations as well, you get those little anxious worries, like wondering if you sound like a complete idiot, like I'm thinking now, because I never record myself. So it's a bit of a new experience for me. Or, just worrying if the person thinks you're interesting, if they're bored and they want to go talk to someone else, or, what you should talk about next, like whether there's going to be an awkward silence, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, basically all of that's going on at the same time as you're trying to do anything, like hold up a conversation, for instance. One-on-one, I'm not too bad with conversations, unless it's with someone new that I've never met before. In that circumstance, I sort of become the quiet, shy girl who doesn't really talk very much. And people generally get the idea that I don't want to have a conversation and then they leave me alone. But it does make, obviously, making new friends quite difficult. And then, of course, you've got group conversations, which is a whole nother thing, because you've got all of that going on as well, as more people to sort of compete with, I suppose. So more things to pay attention to. You quite often I'll come up with something to say, but I don't know the right time to say it. I don't want to interrupt anyone or talk over the top of anyone, so I'm sort of waiting for that perfect moment. And then maybe the conversation moves on to something else, and you're still back there behind everyone else thinking about that thing that you were going to say. So it just takes a bit longer to sort of follow on with conversation changes and stuff like that. So I wanted to talk about how it affects sort of making new friends, because I did mention that is something that I struggle with particularly. So I basically don't make new friends very often. And it's purely just because of that awkward situation where I don't know what to say. If I don't know what someone's interests are, or their different interests to what I have, I sort of have no middle ground to talk about, or know what to do. So yeah, there tends to be like a catalyst event for me with making friends, whether it's someone introducing us, like a mutual friend. I met my oldest friend at a university induction day, and we did have a mutual friend who introduced us. And we basically spent the next year just hanging out together. Fine by me, obviously, because new people is a weird experience for me. But we ended up eventually making friends with another group, who pretty much forced us to sit with them, really, because they were sick of seeing us sit by ourselves. So that was sort of the catalyst for making the group of friends that I had at uni, because otherwise I wouldn't have approached them. I wouldn't have started a conversation with them. If they'd tried to start a conversation with me, I probably would have just shut down and not known what to talk about. But yeah, I also have a friend who lives in Canada, who I met on a trip, and I honestly have no idea how that friendship came up. The earliest thing that I remember is sitting on the bus talking to her. So whether it was just that we sat next to each other on the bus and we were similar ages and had something in common, if I can establish something that attracts me to someone, or something that I have in common with someone pretty quickly, then it's really easy to make friends. But without that sort of thing in common, I just don't know what to do. So yeah, so it makes it a bit difficult to like approach people basically and have a conversation that ends in a friendship. So another thing that I do a lot, that is quite common for people with autism, is that I have things that I'm really interested in that I want to talk about. And if I start talking about them in a conversation, I pretty much can't stop talking about them. I tend to go on and on about it. I want to explain all the details about this thing to this person that I'm talking to. And if it's something that I'm interested in or excited about, I want them to be just as interested and excited as I am. So I feel like I need to explain why it's so good. So I end up just going around in circles a bit, and I can feel the point in time where people start to get sick of me or just stop listening. But I feel like I have to keep continuing to a certain point, talking about it, because it is really interesting to me, even though it might not be interesting to everyone else. Okay, so another thing with autism would probably that probably comes up a bit is feelings. So feelings and emotions, kind of like the thoughts going through my head. Sometimes there's multiple emotions happening. Don't really know which one to put at the forefront. And it sort of makes things a bit difficult if you're projecting a certain emotion at a conversation, but it might not necessarily be the same one the other person has. You might think you had a really friendly conversation, and then later on when you're thinking about it, you're like, oh, did they actually mean that, or did they mean something else? Sometimes you are just having a friendly conversation and you're still doubting it. But yeah, so I don't really talk about my feelings with anyone, not even my family, just because I think it's a personal thing and I think it's weird and like people probably wouldn't want to hear about it. But I'm also very independent when it comes to sort of my issues and my problems. I want to really, well, I expect to deal with it myself, because my whole life I kind of figured that everyone else deals with their stuff. I should be able to deal with my stuff. So I sort of keep everything to myself, really. It's probably not great. But yeah, I just find it really awkward to talk about what I'm feeling at the moment. Probably my partner is the only person that really hears anything about my feelings. Um, but yeah, and what comes with that is empathy as well. A lot of people have a conception that um, people with autism can't show empathy, which is not true. Some of them can. I struggle with it in the sense of if I haven't been through something similar myself. So I find it impossible to know how someone's feeling if I've never felt like that. So that makes it hard for me to know what to say to someone. If I have been through something similar, I'll generally try to be empathetic by telling that story to someone. It probably doesn't always come across great. So I think sometimes it probably comes across as trying to story top people. I'm not trying to story top people. I'm just trying to express to them that I know how they feel. And, I've been in that situation before, so I know how hard it is. And that's sort of how I show empathy with people. So another big thing with autism is stimming. I actually hate the term for this. I don't know why. I just think it sounds weird to me. And I honestly can't believe I just said it out loud. But it is an important part of autism. And this is basically the physical manifestations of it. So this is what people see. It's like repetitive behavior. There's some people hand flap. I do a lot of picking my nails or biting my nails. I just put nail polish on the other day, which will probably all be chipped off by tomorrow. And, I do things like chew the skin off the inside of my cheek or off my lips. I tap my fingers a lot. Tap my leg, which people find really irritating, or play with my hair as well. So yeah, it's basically just things that people with autism do. It's for a number of different reasons. It could be because it's a calming exercise. It could be to relieve excess energy. Sometimes it's just something to do to occupy your brain. So, you're not focusing on sort of everything else around you. You're focusing on just doing that one movement over and over again. So yeah, sometimes it's a subconscious thing. I don't even know that I'm doing it. I'll be tapping my leg and someone in the family will ask me to stop because it's annoying. So yeah, sometimes it's something that we don't even realize we're doing. So where are we? Another really popular thing with people with autism is special interests. So similar to obviously things that we want to talk about all the time. But basically, it's things that, people might be really good at, or that they just are really interested in. Some people don't have really particular special interests. I do. I often paint, and I realized the other day, probably the only time that I don't have a million things flying around my brain. I'm just focused on the color paint that I've got and where that color has to go to match what I'm painting, pretty much. So I could do that for hours a day. I also like to know how things happen. So I'm really interested in like disasters, like news stories, all that sort of thing. I love watching shows like air crash investigations or when buildings collapse, all those sort of things, that sort of give you all the information about how these things happen, what happens in that moment. I also love to watch things like I Shouldn't Be Alive, like knowing what goes through someone's head in that situation, how they get into that situation, and like what your brain essentially does to help you get out of the situation, weird things that people do in those situations. I just like to sort of, and I love researching about it, like finding out all the information that I can about that situation. I love the story of the Titanic for the same reason. Just everything that had to happen that night to cause that disaster. I also just love the Titanic because I think it looks amazing, and I would have loved to have seen it. I would love to go down and see it where it is now, but I don't have millions of dollars, so that's probably not possible. But yeah, even the whole thing about it, the fact that it's going to disappear eventually because it will just erode away, I find really interesting. I also, in the same sort of sense, I love reading. I could read all day as well, but I love reading sad books, books where characters die or have some major trauma or just a tragedy happens in the story. And I think that is because I can really relate to their story emotionally. With you develop the character and you really understand the character because everything's sort of written down for you. And you can really associate with that emotional trauma that they're going through, that you can almost feel what they're going through. And I think it's probably because I don't usually relate to people like that in person. So that gives me an outlet to be able to do that. So yeah, it's weird. I know everyone tells me that it's weird, but it's just something that I really love, reading sad books, or watching sad movies as well. I love that too. So I also love superhero movies and stuff like that. I love Spider-Man. It started from just a novelty gift from my sister. She bought me a Spider-Man toy. And because I'm arachnophobic, so it was just a funny story, which then evolved into me being really interested in Spider-Man. I'm a real purist when it comes to Spider-Man. I think that I like the Amazing Spider-Man as well, but I think that the original Spider-Man is the real Spider-Man. But yeah, I just love the comics. I love everything about it. And where am I? Yeah, so I'm really interested in AFL as well. I had a favorite player for years and years and years, and he decided to retire last year, and I pretty much had a breakdown. I called my mum on the phone crying because I was so upset that he was retiring. So yeah, just things that we really attach to things that we're interested in as well. I tend to also attach feelings to things that don't have feelings, so inanimate objects like teddies. I can't pick a teddy up in the store and put it back on the shelf because I feel like I'm abandoning it, and that it felt like it was coming home with me, and then it turns out I'm just leaving it in the store. So and I really associate with animals as well. Like, I love animals, and Bundy's a rescue. And I just hate any story about animals not being well cared for or anything like that. One of the other things I have, it's sort of a disorder, I guess, that can come with autism, not always, but it's called dyscalculia, and it's basically being really bad at maths. And there's sort of a misconception that everyone who has autism is really good at numbers and maths and counting. I'm really awful at all those things, and I love to explain it using a story about the first time that I told my partner that I was terrible at maths. And he was sort of like, yeah, okay, sure. And I came back to him with, no, I'm really awful at maths. Like, I couldn't tell you what 6 times 3 is. And his reaction was to be like, well, everybody really knows what that is. Like, that's not hard. So you do know what that is. And then I spent probably 30 seconds to a minute trying to work it out, my fingers in my head. And honestly, just the look on his face was priceless when he realized that I actually didn't know what 6 times 3 is. Like, most people know how to work that out. For me, it's just really confusing, and I need a lot of time to be able to work it out in my head. I'll usually take sort of the bigger number and try to put it into groups of the smaller number, but I get confused and lost, and yeah, basically I just need time to sort of work out maths problems. I even have issues with addition and subtraction. So I will use my fingers to count, or I will picture in my head a dice, and quite often I do the symbols with my hands as well, counting the number of dots on the dice to try and work out what the sum is. But yeah, it takes me about 10 times longer than the average person to do that. So yeah, that's what got invented calculators for, I suppose. And I have no idea how I passed like chemistry in uni, because it was masquerading as maths the whole time. So yeah, I think that was everything that I was going to talk about today on my list. But I'll talk about some stuff in the next video, maybe some stuff about sensory issues, some memory stuff, and then just some other little idiosyncrasies again that I have that people might relate to. But I hope you found that informative, and I hope that if you don't have autism, that it's given you a bit more of an idea about what it's like to function on a daily basis with autism, and that it might help you relate to some people if you know anyone who does have autism. And if you do have autism, or if you think that you might, I hope that you realize that there are other people out there who have similar interests and do similar things to you. So if there is anything that you want me to talk about in future videos, feel free to comment, or if you just want to have a chat or talk about what you do, then feel free to add a comment, and subscribe if you want to see future videos from me. But yeah, I will post a new video soon. Thanks. Bye.